Would you ask Mr. Burd to come back in, please?
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Burd?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Burd.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Burd, we were on the question of the word filler, or filler material, and its introduction into what we've seen as 12.7. And I just want to revisit an answer you gave us before lunch and its purpose. Just to be clear.
Yes.
When the expression filler material, not including sealants, gaskets, sealants and similar, brackets, etc., was added, did you intend it to cover any core of a composite panel, whether or not the material comprising the core could be used in other applications for insulation purposes, or only such materials as could be used for insulation purposes?
The consideration at the time was in relation to the learnings from the Edge fire and the comments from the NHBC. But from recollection, there was a discussion about utilising the term filler, which was primarily being driven for the purposes of controlling thermal insulation where it wasn't offering a thermal performance. But the discussion would have gone that actually it could relate ultimately to any filler material if it happened to be of a combustible nature, and therefore the intention is it could be controlled.
So just to be very clear, I think the answer is the former. You intended it to cover any core of a composite panel, regardless of whether that material comprising the core could be used in other applications for insulation purposes.
Yes.
Yes. And therefore, is this right, that it was your understanding, and certainly your intention behind the language, that the polyethylene core of an ACM panel had to be of limited combustibility?
Yes.
Or rather, the core.
The core.
Of, even though the material in that core would not ordinarily be used for insulation purposes.
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, while I'm on this document, and we're going to come back to the question of filler in just a moment, but while we're here for convenience, can I ask you please to be shown the next page of approved document B, CLG 130220097. Now, this is the version of Diagram 40 that went to press and which was published.
Yes, sir.
And you can see the heading, Diagram 40, Provisions for External Surfaces or Walls. You see the word or there?
I do.
And can you confirm, we can do this by the documents if you like, that the previous version said provisions for external surfaces of walls?
Correct, sir.
Can you account for the change from of to or?
I believe it's a typo. It's a mistake. From recollection, if you look at, obviously, the 2002 as amended approved document, it talks of 2 walls. If you look at our 2005 consultation document, approved document B, that led to the 2006 edition, it talks about 2 walls. And if I could refer you back, and obviously there is a reference in the top left-hand corner here, that talks to see paragraph 12.5 to 12.6, when that provision in those paragraphs refers to Diagram 40, it talks about provisions for external surfaces to walls. So I believe that to be a mistake, a typo.
All right, but perhaps getting it in a different way, you don't recall any discussion or any rationale which would explain the change from of to or?
No, sir.
Can you explain the mechanical reason for why that typo would have been made? Put another way, why was anybody amending the title to Diagram 40 at all?
I don't believe, other than the number, I don't believe there was any reason for it to be done.
other than the number, yes.
Sorry, the diagram number.
Diagram number. When did you first notice that it said or and not of?
Not that long ago.
During the preparations for this inquiry?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
I see. Not at the time and not
No.
at any time before the Grenfell Tower fire?
No.
Right. Now, going back to Phila, if we can we please go to CLG 3019641, your statement, page 13, paragraph 32. You say there that after the publication of ADB, you say a considerable dissemination exercise was undertaken by the department in conjunction with the professional institutions and building control bodies. It is my recollection that the revised guidance on functional requirement B4 of the regulations, section 12 of the 2006 version of the ADB, and the reference to the control of fillers was addressed at these various events. The original slides that formed part of the dissemination exercise are appended to this statement, with slide 55 being the most relevant as it addresses the new guidance contained within paragraph 12.7. Following such activity, it was my understanding that the industry would have had a far greater appreciation of the term fillers and would have recognised that their inclusion in a design would amount to a relevant consideration for buildings over 18 metres in height, whether being constructed or retrofitted. Now, let's look at that slideshow presentation. It's at CLG 3019451. And if we go to page 2, we can see the first page. Who authored this?
This would have been a joint effort from recollection between the department, so myself and Tracy Cole, and Brian and Sam Greenwood.
Right. When you delivered it, did you present it with anybody? Was it you on your own, or was it Brian Martin
No,
on
it
his
was-
own? How did it work?
It normally, from recollection, it might have been somebody from the department, typically me, and either Brian or Sam as well. And then, as part of it, dissemination is a hugely important part of what we do, and the department hadn't always been the best at doing this. So rather than just do items piecemeal, we actually asked the relevant professional institutions, not the only ones, but the primary professional institutions, to work together. And therefore, from recollection, this one would have been RIBA, British Architects, ABE, Association of Building Engineers, because of quite a large percentage of their membership being building control, and the RICS as well, again with a sizable contingent of their members, a meaningful, being building control. We'd ask them to work together. They would typically develop an agenda, and whereby we would weave in what we wanted to present, or what we thought pertinent to in this case, the 2006 approved document B, and they might add other people to the agenda. It might just be half a day from recollection, and we'd just cover what we see here, or they might have brought other speakers in as well.
Right, I see. So that it wasn't limited to speakers from government?
No.
Now, if we go please to page 55, we will find slide 55, which you refer to in your statement. If we can expand that a little, please. It says, external wall construction, insulation material stroke products. In a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, not including gaskets, sealants and similar, etc., should be of limited combustibility. Cavity barriers, section 9. External surfaces, diagram 40. Or meet the performance criteria given in BR 135, etc. Now, this just sets out the text of 12.7, doesn't it?
It does.
It doesn't provide any information on what types of products the government considered were fillers for the purposes of 12.7, does it?
It doesn't within the text, no.
No. It also draws an express distinction between insulation products and materials and external surfaces, doesn't it? It lists them separately.
Yes.
And there's no suggestion in here that the requirement of limited combustibility applies to all components over 18 metres, is there?
No.
Nor is there any indication about about the fact that the core of a composite rain screen panel needed to be made of material of limited combustibility, even though that material had no insulating purpose? Is there?
No.
No. Why is that?
Typically, in terms of presenting style, we wanted to draw out the changes within the approved document, in this case 2006, and then depending upon the presenter, and I don't use notes as a presenter, I use these as an aid memoir, that I would then present and talk through the slide, providing that embellishment and relationship as we went. So
Right.
it didn't definitively cover the points you raised, sir. I acknowledge that, but hopefully they were spoken to when these were delivered.
Right. So your evidence is that you would have, as it were, filled in for filler, and provided an explanation along the lines of the evidence you've given to us today.
I would have thought so, yes.
Well, you would have thought so. Isn't the same as I remember doing that. Did you do it?
I believe I did.
Okay. Just looking at what we have, though, do you accept, I think you do, that the slideshow doesn't tell industry that the phrase filler material was intended to refer to the core of a cladding panel made of composite materials, does it?
It does not, no.
Nor does it signal, let alone signal, that all significant elements of the external wall construction over 18 metres are to be of limited combustibility.
On the slide, no.
I mean, this is the only document you mention in your statement, Mr. Burd. Can you confirm that the department didn't provide a circular, an FAQ, a written document explaining what you meant by filler material?
That did not happen, sir.
So it was down to these roadshows, if I can use
Yes.
a word like that,
Yes.
where you would come along and explain it in your words.
Yes.
That would mean that people attending might get different versions, different iterations of an explanation. And I'm assuming you didn't speak to a fixed script.
No, there was no fixed script. However, as I say, they were typically attended by somebody from the department, primarily me, but colleagues might have delivered it, somebody from the BRE as well. And so it was a joint contribution to expose and highlight the main changes within the document. At the end of the day, it was a huge piece of work to go from the 2002 as amended approved document B to the 2 volumes of the 2006 approved document, and therefore there shouldn't be any illusion that people needed to read these documents through and take the time to do that.
Now, at the end of paragraph 32 of your statement, if we can just go back to that, please, you say, and I've read this to you, that after these presentations, you say, it was my understanding that the industry would have had a far greater appreciation of the term fillers and would have recognised that their inclusion in a design would amount to a relevant consideration for buildings over 18 metres in height, whether being constructed or retrofitted. Now, first of all, the term fillers there's no term fillers, is it? It's filler materials.
Apologies, I should have used it in its fullness within this paragraph.
Right. And what gave you to understand that the industry understood that the expression filler material, not including gasket sealants and similar, etc., meant what you've told us today?
By virtue of publication of the approved documents, by virtue of the dissemination exercise, and again from recollection, I believe we did about 10 such events, and there would have been additional ad hoc events too, and then the professional institutions themselves would have done individual events with their own expert members in delivery. I believe that level of dissemination should have assisted the marketplace in understanding what these items were. I would have expected that if there were considerable misunderstanding of what the term was, we would have started to hear from building control and designers and similar that they didn't appreciate what a filler was.
Did you get feedback from those who had put these roadshows on, or those who had attended them, that they now understood that, for example, the core of a composite rain screen panel had to be made of material of limited combustibility.
We wouldn't get that sort of feedback in return.
Right. So if that is the case, what was the basis of your understanding that the industry, as you put it, would have had a far greater appreciation of the term fillers in the sense that you've explained it today?
Of course, sir. Because of part of the dissemination process, whilst only potentially 10 events and others, we've probably got to speak to somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 professionals in England. In addition to what happens here with these sorts of disseminations, in addition to, as I explained, what some of the professional institutions and associations would do of their own volition with their own fire experts rolling out this, putting on further dissemination exercises, there would have been articles in the professional journals and similar. And so, again, I understand it's a hugely important aspect, filler, and I do understand it needs to be couched in what was a very large revision in end-to-end of the approved document with a number of items within it. But it was my understanding at the time, not receiving questions and concerns about what does it mean, I therefore felt from what I knew, what I was and wasn't hearing, that there would have been that level of appreciation.
Right. Was the purpose of this part of the guidance, indeed the guidance altogether, not to make it crystal clear to the ordinary reader what they had to do without any sort of explanation from government?
That is the primary intent, to make it as clear as possible, yes.
Did it not occur to you, therefore, that although it was, of course, helpful to explain to industry the structure and principal changes to ADB so as to increase awareness,
Yes.
on the one hand, it was something altogether different to explain to industry the intended meaning of an expression which required explanation?
Again, from the point that we discussed prior to the break, I didn't necessarily feel that it did need further explanation at the time. I felt it would be well understood. But from my perspective, when you develop an approved document, and typically the department with the resources it had previously, we were in a much better position at this time, we could undertake these dissemination events and similar. We were also very close, and we would have utilised, of course, the BRAC working party would have been part of the dissemination exercise too, just thinking about it. So we can do what we can do, and we roll out these changes. I can't recall items coming back to me saying, I don't understand filler or similar at the time.
When did it first occur to you that you needed to speak to 12.7 and explain it and tell your audience it applies to the core of a composite panel, as opposed to thinking, well, it's clear on its face what that means, it needs no explanation?
I was under the impression that people did understand what it was.
So why did you need to give them an explanation at all?
Sorry, sir.
Why did you need to give them an explanation of 12.7 at all?
In terms of the slide, that
Yes.
because it formed part of the major part of the changes, and of course what that slide was trying to provide a lead into was, of course, the rearrangement of the guidance and the turnaround to lead with the external wall construction, external surfaces, and the changes therein. And of course, the other piece that was on the slide as well was recognition that we now had a national full-scale test method in terms of 8414, and by this time, I believe it was summer 2013, BR 135 had been published. That was also cited within the approved document.
Now, I want to turn to the question of review after 2006. You say in your statement, and I don't think there's a need to go to it, paragraph 27 at page 11, that after 2008, the department, as you put it, moved to a far more structured and cyclical approach to the undertaking of technical reviews, seeking wherever possible to bring about changes no more often than every 3 years.
Yes, so it's called the periodic review. I think it formed part of the future of building regulations. I believe it was around 2008, 2009, yes.
So was it your expectation then that after the 2006 revisions, the approved document B would need to be revisited after 3 years, in other words, in 2009?
No, the general suggestion within the consultation document was, at that time, was that it shouldn't happen more often than every 3 years, and typically no part of the building regulations should be reviewed every 2 terms, so every 6 years, with the exception of the energy efficiency parts of the building regulations, Part L. So, and from recollection, the consultation document that went out to support this proposal to move to a periodic review had within it approved document B being next, I can't remember, started or finished in 2013. And so that was in that consultation document.
Now, in paragraph 28 of your statement, you say that the proposal to review triennially was overtaken by the coalition government's policy after 2010
Yes.
Of deregulation.
Yes.
Yes. But I think it's right, isn't it, that if the department discovered a need to make a change to ADB because it wasn't properly understood and the effect of that misunderstanding was serious, then it could do that outside the scope of the cyclical review, couldn't it?
That would be my understanding, yes.
Yes. Now I'm going to I'll come back to that, and I'll come back to deregulation. Going on to, but sticking with cyclicality. CLG 407617, please. This is an email from you dated the 3rd of May 2007 to a group of recipients within the department, including Brian Martin and Sam Greenwood, and you can see that the subject is tall stories rising to the challenge of fire safety. And it starts, more from my mate Dave Sugden. It's fortunate that I'm going away for 3 months, otherwise I might have gotten more than a little irritated by this. You go down, it's about sprinklers.
Okay.
And in the last sentence, which is really what I want to focus on, you say, he also fails to mention our public undertaking that funds permitting, we will undertake a fundamental review of periods of fire resistance enshrined in ADB as part of the next review 5 to 8 years away. I think that would take you to roughly 2013.
I believe it would, sir.
Yeah. So that suggests you were envisaging review only on a much longer timescale than triennially, I think, as you've just confirmed.
Yes.
Were funds generally a problem in dictating when a review could be undertaken?
Funding for supportive research.
Funding for supportive research, funding for your team doing the drafting?
It got progressively harder.
Right. From when?
We were witnessing a drive for better regulation at the end of the Labour administration. By the time coalition government came in 2010, there were a number of aspects looking at how they could better look at regulation. And so there were control mechanisms in the form of, for want of a better term, throttling new regulation by making provisions of one in, one out, which I believe came in 2012, which is whereby if you were bringing a new regulation into play at a cost of X, you had to remove the same amount of money, a deregulatory measure, to allow you to do that. That moved to one in, two out in the start of 2013, I believe, and then ultimately went to one in, three out, but I'd left the department by then. That was what was utilised to control the flow of new regulation. And then as part of coalition government coming in, there was, I can't quite recall, it might have been a manifesto commitment that they, over the course of the next parliament, they would reduce the costs and the cost burden upon home builders. So there was in effect a moratorium of and controlling what further regulations you could bring forward, or the department would bring forward. And there was also a red tape challenge undertaken, whereby the government re-engaged with industry, the relevant parts of industry, to ask about the efficacy of regulations and should they be kept or should they be removed. And there was a red tape challenge. I think it might have started in 2011, but the one for the built environment, which would have included building regulations, I believe was 2012.
Right. I just want to date when it started to get harder. So, you got a
2010.
range of dates.
2010.
Thank you. Now, let's go to CLG 30136672. This is a covering letter, 20th of May 2005, which accompanied your submission to the Minister in relation to consultation on Part B that we looked at earlier. It goes to Yvette Cooper, dated 20th of May 2005, copy to a number of people whose names will be familiar to you, including yourself.
Yes.
Now, if we look at the second paragraph there, it says this: we have had a discussion with you, that's Yvette Cooper, about building regulations generally and touched on a possible new direction, including the idea of a pause. However, Part B may be one area you may wish to take a view on separately from that wider consultation, and our advice is that the Part B work should be allowed to proceed. Now, first, were you party to the discussion about the pause?
I don't believe I was.
Do you know why the idea of a pause was put forward, briefly?
No, I don't.
Was it as a result of the costs of the review, which I think were about the 20 million mark?
As I say, this is not quite the end. This is 2005. There might have been some other consideration underway that I can't recall as to why they wanted that pause. I can't recall, sir. Sorry.
No. And in fact, I think, as we've established before, in the result after 2006, there were amendments in 2010 and 2013. But 2013 was the next review.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, if you, in paragraph 62 of your statement, you say minor amendments made in 2010, non-technical amendments in 2012. I think you mean 13.
I do apologise.
But no compelling evidence that you've seen that would have led you to consider that any wider changes to ADB were necessary in the period 2009 to 2013. That's the gist of your evidence, yes?
That's my understanding.
Right.
Sir.
Is it fair to say, though, that the department was receiving correspondence in the interim which was identifying concerns?
That was quite common, yes.
Quite common. Well, let's look at one or two. Can we please go to CLG 100035572? And you'll see that here is an email from Brian Martin to you on the 18th of February 2008, which he has received 4 days before that from Philip Reed at Political Intelligence. And if we look at that email, he says, "Dear Brian, thank you for your time this afternoon." See that?
Yes.
And if you look at the third paragraph down, he says, "We have serious concerns about the fire safety surrounding certain types of composite panels and feel that the current standards and regulations need to be reviewed to ensure people's lives are not put at risk unnecessarily. There is a belief that there are loopholes in the existing framework that allows some manufacturers to offer products that are misleading in their sales documentation and are a genuine fire risk to the public. I've attached the very basic briefing paper which covers some of the issues in more detail." And the penultimate sentence there is what I'm going to ask you about. But if you scroll back up, you can see that Brian Martin responds in the way you get to see a few days later. He says this: "Philip, many thanks for your email. As I explained today, if you're concerned that a manufacturer is deliberately misleading people with its literature, then this is something that should be taken up with the relevant Trading Standards Authority. I understand that Eurobond have already made such a complaint to the Advertising Standards Authority, and this has in part been upheld. But it's right, is it not, that concerns about loopholes in the existing framework would probably fall within the remit of the department, wouldn't they?"
Potentially, yes.
Did you endeavour to find out what the loopholes might be to which Mr. Reid was referring?
I can't actually recall this email coming to me, but no doubt I would have discussed it with Brian, and the fact that Brian suggested actually there's something here that you might wish to consider for the Advertising Standards Authority and directed him that way.
Why, though? Why not also conclude that there was something for you to consider, namely the belief that there are loopholes in the existing framework that allow manufacturers to pump out misleading sales documentation?
As alluded in Mr. Reid's email, he spoke with Brian and discussed it through. I can only presume that I would have had a discussion with Brian and he would have taken me through what the detail was. And if it was a case of, people making claims that they shouldn't really have made, then that's not necessarily directly for the department. First and foremost, that's something that the Advertising Standards Authority should consider.
There are two parts to this, though, aren't there? There's the fact that manufacturers were offering products that are misleading in their sales documentation.
Yeah.
But there's also the point being made that it's based on the existence of a perception that there are loopholes in the existing framework. Why wasn't that latter point something for you to get to the bottom of?
As I say, I can't recall the email or any subsequent discussion with Brian, but if Brian had spoken it through with the gentleman, then I would envisage that Brian, by this point, I don't think he'd been formally placed within the department. He might still have been working for BRE then. But Brian would have managed to assess as to actually this is something that we need to consider, or actually when he explored with Mr. Reid and got to the nub of what the issue was, I would have expected that if Brian felt actually this is advertising standards, it's not a perceived loophole, they are blatantly making claims they shouldn't be made.
Do you remember asking Brian Martin that question? What are the loopholes? Or do you remember being told by him, don't worry, he's wrong about that, there aren't any loopholes?
I can't recall any such discussion.
Let's go to CLG 000195008, please. This is about a month later, 20th of March 2008. CLG 000195008. It's an email from you to Tracy Cullen, Brian Martin, 25th of March 2008. And you say, please deal, if only to say that any work we do, and it is not all for us to support / pay for, will be guided by the necessary steering group. Thanks, Ant. And below that we see the important document, an email from Larry Cody to you on March 20th, 2008.
Yes.
Subject, innovative construction products and techniques.
Yes.
Now, it's a longish email. I want just to focus with you, if I may, on the second paragraph. But it says this: during the last month, Rockwell has been assessing the DCLG report for innovative construction products and techniques, BD 2503. As manufacturers of non-combustible insulation and fire protection policies, many of the issues covered in this report have been of very great interest to us for a number of years, and as such we have developed product, systems and expertise relevant to these methods of construction. And then he says this: having witnessed the speed and extent of damage resulting from fires in buildings during recent years, we share the concern that traditional methods of evaluating the risk from such events may not be sufficiently adequate in their current form to be applied directly to alternative construction methods and products. Indeed, we believe that in certain circumstances, new and possibly larger scale tests may be necessary to adequately assess the performance of a construction system, such as the relatively new BS 8414 tests for spread of fire on facades. Did you understand Mr. Cody to be expressing concern that Class 0 was inadequate?
I think he's expressing concern in relation to some of the fires that have been witnessed here. And therefore his preference potentially would be to use the new full-scale 8414 test.
Well, he says we share the concern
Yes.
that traditional methods of evaluating the risk from such events may not be sufficiently adequate in their current form to be applied directly to alternative construction methods and products.
Yes.
What did you understand by that?
I think it is, coming from an individual manufacturer that makes a very good product, in this case non-combustible, they would, as they expressed from recollection, they would like to see things like the new full-scale test methodology or more materials of limited combustibility because they believe it to be correct and robust and the right way to proceed, but they do make products themselves which are non-combustible. And, I've known Larry Cody, I've not seen him for a very long time, but he was an absolute gent. But these are, an email like this would not be uncommon from a manufacturer who makes a material which is of limited combustibility or non-combustible. And I might get there might be other comments have come in from manufacturers that make maybe a plastics-based product. But he was expressing a concern that actually, perhaps moving forward, they would like to see greater use of the full-scale test and more application of materials of limited combustibility. They do talk about fires, generally, thankfully not necessarily deaths and injuries. And there still remains a push by some parts of industry as well that actually such a move to use more materials of limited combustibility would give greater levels of property protection as well. And so I don't know if Mr. Cody was addressing that as well.
Now, your suggested response, which I've read to you, is at the top of page 1,
Could I see it again, please?
which we need to scroll back up to. It's something of a brush-off, isn't it?
I've invited Tracy and Brian to consider it, but from my perspective, it was saying, quite clearly that any work we do undertake, will be guided by the necessary steering group. Yeah. And by virtue of the discussion that we had over CC 1924, I'm not saying it would have happened in terms of Mr. Cody, but this is one side of the industry from a mineral fibre perspective that didn't enjoy a close working relationship with the plastics-based side of the industry. And so what I was saying here is please deal with it, but we're going to be quite clear that actually any decisions on how the work proceeds will be led by the steering group and not by sort of from us giving a point or a direction. It needs to be core with the steering group.
Even though Mr. Cody may have been raising a point in his own commercial interests as part of holding and pushing a particular market position, the point he was making, which was that traditional methods of evaluating risk may not be sufficiently adequate.
Yes.
It was a point you knew from the 2 reports in September 2002 as a result of the CC 1924 test.
Yes.
And here we have some 6 years later, exactly this problem being brought to your attention by a manufacturer. So my question is, given that it comes back to you from industry, why not grapple with it as a problem rather than dismissing it, which I'm suggesting to you you do, as something raised by one manufacturer in order to protect his patch?
I'm not dismissing it per se. What I'm saying here is, because he's referring to a particular contract that was let to the BRE, is that what I want to happen is for the steering group to move forward and consider anything as part of a collective steering group. From my perspective, we can't sit outside the steering group for this piece of work and receive representations from different parts of industry. So it was to say it will be guided by the steering group.
What was the steering group?
There would have been, as is quite typical, there would have been an industry advisory steering group overseeing the work entitled Innovation, Construction Products and Techniques.
Did you ask the steering group to look into the adequacy of Class 0?
I can't recall the scope of the works, but looking at it, it was addressing, again, truly innovative construction products and techniques. So I believe, from recollection, it would have been looking at modern methods of construction, off-site construction with then delivery and build on-site. So it was looking at products coming down for the future and approaches.
Yeah, so not looking at the adequacy of Class 0.
No, but with the backdrop of it would have been considering the implications of such designs and processes from a fire safety perspective.
Which didn't lead you to go and immediately, or even in the medium term, re-examine the appropriateness of Class 0 sitting in diagram 40 in the, by then, 2006 version of approved document B?
No.
No. Let's go to CLG 1003645. Bottom of page 3. This is an email sent by Bill Parler on the 7th of March 2008 to Jeanette Henderson. Bill Parler is of the Association for Specialist Fire Protection, and this is in the context of the Code for Sustainable Homes. And he says in the first main paragraph, I can easily agree and note that ADB will still apply, but we've had a very large dependency on the Class 0 contrivance for building products since the 1960s. This was originally introduced to permit paper-faced plasterboard. Previously, the weakness of the Class 0 approach has been largely compensated by relatively robust and traditional building techniques. However, now, with modern methods and sustainability as a buzzword, designers have taken their eyes off the ball. The consequence is that we see massive increase in fire load introduced into the building fabric, often protected by little more than a thin film of aluminium foil. If the foil or alternative covering remains intact, Class 0 can be maintained. If not, then flashover can be reached in seconds, yes, seconds, not minutes, with combustible lining products. Vulnerable points will occur wherever building services penetrate the combustible materials. It's not just about damaged systems. The prefabricated modular system has similar worries associated with the basic use in innovative design. Regrettably, we are sailing ever closer to a great calamity unless sense and, underlined, better understanding prevails. In recent times, the weakness of over-reliance of the Class 0 approach was demonstrated in the sandwich panel market, where steel sheet covering was used, much more robust than aluminium foil. And he goes on, in a similar but not quite as pertinent vein. And then he says, underneath that, I should continue, in fact. The large spate of fires, deaths, and near deaths that followed caused Appendix F to be added to ADB as guidance, but not as a requirement. Unfortunately, designers have not linked the two issues at all, viz. Hazardous panels and modern methods of construction. Now, this email, if you look up the chain, comes to Tracy Cull on page 3, and eventually makes its way, if you continue up the chain, to the very top, page 1, to you. And it's sent to you from Brian Martin on the 3rd of April 2008, yes?
Yes.
In fact, I think, it comes to you also from Tracy Cull 2 days before that, if you look at the foot of page 1. So you get this email at the time, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Did you not read this email that I've read to you as a very clear warning about the dangers inherent in retaining the reference to Class 0 in approved document B?
It was copied to me. I may well have read it. I can't recall it. But again, those are examples of whereby, I think this was the Association of Specialist Fire Protection, have come forward with their thoughts and observations. But these were comments that people would make from time to time. It covered a number of items there, including off-site construction, from recollection. And the earlier email you showed me about innovative construction products and techniques, I believe, was part of the work that was led to better understand this aspect. They spoke in there about the new Appendix F in the approved document B, which was about sandwich panels. So, yeah, it was a download, and it was given an awful lot of sort of references. But even things to which Mr. Parler referred was the fact that you could put foil-lined insulation material, again, directly into a building, exposed as a surface. That typically, well, I've never seen it happen in 33 years, that you put that inside a flat or similar. So we'd have been aware of some of these concerns here. They've been duly noted, but they were but one part of industry. But in specifically this case, I was copied in on it, but I can't recall receiving it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if we go to page 1 that we're on, and you see the foot of page 1, Tracy Cull sends it to Jeanette Henderson, copying you in and Brian Martin on the 1st of April. She says, Jay, further to this exchange, there are 2 separate issues. And if we turn the page to page 2, you can see the second of the issues. What are the fire implications of using more sustainable building products, which is what BP is referring to?
Yes.
BP being Bill Parler.
Yes.
Many are concerned at the fact that many insulating products can contribute significantly to the spread of fire, and that a number of the exemplar structures at BRE don't actually meet current BRs, triple exclamation mark, both in terms of some of the materials used and the design/layout. For example, open plan staircases in tall houses, external walls covered in very burny stuff, etc. And we do want to do research on both issues with a project on SIP panels, etc. I hope this fills in some of the gaps, her last paragraph, but happy to chat when I'm back in next week, or collar Brian in my absence. It might be worth us, Brian, drafting a quick reply to BP's last email to reassure him that buildings that are constructed for a purpose rather than display still have to meet the requirements of Part B, and that we will be looking at these further issues IDC. Now, I think I've worked out that IDC is in due course.
Of course. Yeah.
Mm. Did you believe at the time that approved document B in its 2006 iteration addressed these concerns?
Yes.
What did you understand the references here to the BRE to relate to?
So there's a demonstration park within the BRE at Garston, which is its innovation park, where they were building examples of highly sustainable buildings, both domestic and I think there's a school building as well. And I think Bill was concerned, Bill Parler, that actually it was his opinion they didn't show compliance with the building regs. And that response there is Tracy suggesting it's a building, it's covered by the building regs, it would need to show compliance. And just wanted to go back and say that to Mr. Parler. Mm. Now, if he was still disagreeing with this demonstration park in this way, then that would be something that perhaps he would raise directly with BRE management.
So the point I'm really seeking to get from you is whether you were surprised to see an industry participant of the eminence of Mr. Parler and his organisation raising with you in pretty clear, trenchant and historic terms the inadequacy of Class Naught, and whether that triggered in your mind a need to go back to the question of Class Naught against the background of everything you and I have discussed about it, and ask yourself, well, should Class Naught still play any part in approved document B and specifically diagram 40?
I don't believe I had that thought at this time. I enjoyed a very good relationship with Bill Parler, and working in somewhere like the ASFP, we would have had a good dialogue, even though at this point I'd stepped away from Part B. But it didn't make me think that at this moment in time, we should relook at Class Naught. The one point that is raised here for sustainability is that the innovation, construction products and materials piece that you just showed me, I believe that was an example of a piece of work that was trying to look at this very issue of off-site construction, more sustainable. So, not at this time, no.
Can we then move to 2012 and CLG 30191179? 19179. This is an email from Brian Martin to Louise Upton, copied to you and Stephen Kelly, and the email underneath it doesn't appear to have a particular set of participants, but he says, hello, French was quite rusty. What he's doing, I think, I'm trying to summarise this for you, is sending a video to you of the fire that had taken place in France, in Roubaix, that month. Right?
Yes.
And what I'm interested in, for your purposes, is the email at the top of the chain. If we can just go to the top of page 1 for you. And Brian Martin says, for info, the video on the second link is pretty alarming. This wouldn't be in accordance with building regs, brackets, probably.
Okay.
Brackets. Now, you got that email. Did you consider carrying out a review at this point to ensure that there was no such risk of a similar system like that constructed in Roubaix being built in the United Kingdom?
I don't believe I did. The issue is with, obviously, member states have their own national building regulations, and therefore one would have to completely understand what provisions they have, both active and passive fire provisions in a building, to understand what existed and why the building might have performed in this way. Is this the building in France that ultimately had its kinetic system, so it was an external cladding system? Is that correct? I don't know.
Well,
I don't know. But being shared a video of a big fire, yes, of course, it's very relevant. If I'd had the time, I'm sure I would have watched it. Brian's comment there, it wouldn't be in accordance with our building regs. I note that probably. It is unfortunately a fire that we do see these fires around the world. And if we can glean understanding and appreciation from them to help us in our understanding, then that would be most useful. But as it's a video link, and we don't have specific details, I'm not too sure what more we could do with it.
what did you understand by Brian Martin's words, probably? This wouldn't be in accordance with building regulations, probably.
Exactly that. Without knowing the details, he didn't believe it would be in accordance with our building regs, but not definitively, so hence he's put the word probably there.
Why not definitively?
Because...
let me ask it differently. What was it about what you knew about this fire that meant that you couldn't come to a conclusion whether a fire like this couldn't happen here because it was because of the effect of the building regulation?
Because we don't know, unless there is information here as to the specific products that have been utilised and the nature of the combustible insulation and similar. This is a tragic fire that's been videoed, but we'd have to understand it in completeness as to how it has been designed, how it has been built, and ultimately what products are contained within it.
After this, did you take Brian Martin's remark and investigate first what the Roubaix building was comprised of, in other words, what its cladding system consisted of, and secondly, examine it and the fire, the causes of the fire and the spread of the fire, in order to answer the question, would it be in accordance with the building regulations, so as to inform yourself about whether there were any defects in the regulations or approved document B?
I didn't, but obviously from Brian's perspective, he might have undertaken further investigation. I noticed he's also sent it to colleagues elsewhere within the department too. I didn't undertake any such investigation. I wouldn't have had the time to do that. But
why didn't you ask him to?
I don't. Maybe I did. I don't know.
Well, we've seen no evidence of that. No.
Okay.
So my question is, why not ask him and say to him, Brian, could you get to the bottom of what this was made of, cause of the fire, get a report, if you can, from the French Fire and Rescue Service, get to the bottom of how it was built, and come back and double-check it against our own building regulations?
And by virtue, potentially, Brian might have asked that of BRE under its contract for fires of special interest.
Did he?
I don't know.
You don't know. Can I ask you then about something else, which is the investigation of Real Fire's contract in and what happened to it in 2012? We've already looked in some detail at the working relationship between the department and the BRE, and I want to ask you about the investigation of Real Fire's project. Now, first, I think it's right, isn't it? That project had been running since about 1988.
From recollection, yes.
Yes, and let's go to BRE 401054. This is the investigation of Real Fire's report prepared by the BRE for the period April 2003 to March 2004. It's prepared for you.
Yes.
And we can see the period. The date of the document at the bottom is the 2nd of April 2004. And if we go to page 3, we can see that one of the objectives of the project, if we have that expanded, please, in the second paragraph, it says this: the information gathered is primarily used to inform approved document B for England and Wales, with occasional input to the regulatory documents in Scotland and Northern Ireland. This information must offer effective solutions to real fire problems, which can only be done by examining information from real fires. Positive feedback is provided where guidance has helped to minimise fire spread and threat to life. Now, did you understand that I've read to you to be the principal purpose of this project?
Yes, from recollection at this time. Yep.
Over what period did you commission and receive reports such as this?
I believe I had a contract in place for my entire time that I was overseeing Part B of the building regulations. So when I was promoted in 2000 and then effectively in charge desk officer for Part B, and then when I was promoted in 2007, from recollection, I can't guarantee it, this important document continued.
Now, I want to ask you about a particular change to the contractual arrangements in 2012, the year before you left. Can we go, please, to BRE 50951? This is the BRE's proposal in relation to a framework research piece of work prepared for Brian Martin.
Yes.
Dated the 1st of October 2012. Do you remember seeing this at the time?
No.
Were you involved in assessing this proposal or other aspects of letting this contract at the time?
I don't believe so, no.
You weren't. Do you know who was?
It would have been led by Brian.
Right.
He was the desk officer for Part B.
Was anyone overseeing it?
There would have been support from a colleague who oversaw all research, so a policy colleague.
Who was that?
I forget colleagues. He worked for Bob Ledsome, but he was in charge of, it might have been Andrew Newton, actually.
Right.
Potentially.
But not you.
No, sir.
Right. Well, let's see how we go with this then. You may not be able to help me, but to go to page 4. Well, perhaps we can take it more shortly. Were you aware of the contractual arrangements in relation to the Real Fires project after this bid had been received and accepted?
No, sir.
You weren't. Can you tell us anything about the investigation of Real Fires project or the contractual arrangements underlying it?
Typically,
At this time onwards?
again, it would have been seen as being an important and vital piece of understanding and appreciation of what was happening when it came to fires. Anything that can provide the department with evidence of what's happening and what might be perceived to be working or not would always be most useful.
Can you tell us anything about why this bid document reflects a requirement from government that it should not contain any policy recommendations?
Not definitively here, but from recollection, and I believe this is still the same now with the department's contracts, which it publishes online. From recollection, what the department, what we were wanting at the time, is a clear appreciation of what happened from a fire perspective and what the potential implications might be. But first and foremost, to understand the fire that happened, why it happened, how it happened, and then thereafter, because if something was of note, there would typically be a further report on that fire, especially if there was a visit. It could either be in that document or in an end of contract document or something that they could go into potential implications in that environment. So I think what it was trying to do from recollection, and please forgive me, was just keep the focus at this stage for this report on what actually happened, and if there was a need for further insight and similar things that might need to be considered for reviews of, in this case, Part B, that could be picked up in a separate report from recollection. But that is just from memory.
Yeah. Was there any thought given at the time, given the Roubaix fire that we've just discussed and the emergence of international fires towards the end of 2012 in the UAE, to asking those who were running this project at the BRE to look further afield and look at overseas fires to see if they were fires of special interest and report to you on them?
That's maybe a discussion that Brian had with BRE.
You can't tell us anything about that?
No, sir.
Can I then turn to a completely different topic, which is the Lakanal House fire? Now, as you know, I'm sure, the Lakanal House fire occurred on the 3rd of July 2009, and there were 6 deaths. And it led to an inquest which occupied the coroner, Francis Kirkham, for some 3 months between January and March 2013.
Yes.
Now, you'll know, I think, perhaps you knew this at the time, that Lakanal was a 16-storey block of 2-storey maisonette flats built between 1955 and 1960 and refurbished in 2006 and 7, yes?
Yes.
And that resulted in the majority of its external walls being replaced with external cladding and a system of aluminium-framed window units. Well, certainly panels on the external wall, if not a cladding system.
Yes.
And the units incorporated double-glazed windows, partially glazed doors, and composite infill panels, which are the relevant product for this purpose. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, you'll remember, I think also, and tell me if you don't, that an investigation into that fire was carried out by Sir Ken Knight, who had become the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor as a result of the legislative changes in the FSO in 2005.
Yes, sir.
Now, if we go to HOM 401092, what I'm showing you here is Ken Knight's final report to the Secretary of State, dated the 30th of July 2009. And you deal with this in your statement at paragraph 170 at page 54, and you say you were copied into this document when it was submitted at the end of July 2009 as it was. Can we take it that you read this report when you were copied into it?
I would have presumed so. It would be dependent upon what I was doing at the time. But obviously what I've put in my witness statement was paperwork that was provided to me by the department, as I'd subsequently left in 2013. So they were able to confirm that I had received it. I can't recall reading it, but I may have had a scan through.
Right.
But I can't recall.
Doing the best you can with what you knew about your practice and the customary way you dealt with documents you were sent.
Yes.
Is this the kind of document, a document from the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor to the Secretary of State about a fire which killed 6 people, a document that you would have read?
I would have thought so, or if I didn't have the chance to have read it, I might have sat down with Brian and maybe Sir Ken as well and discussed it as well. But wherever possible, yeah, I would have thought I would have attempted to.
Right.
Yes.
Let's look at page 24, please. There's a heading on page 24 under paragraph 2, the incident. And if you look down at paragraph 2.2, it says this: Although investigations are still ongoing, it is believed that the fire then spread externally to the 11th floor, where the maisonette directly above became involved in the fire. This is not unique fire spread caused by the significant heat and flame coming from the uncontrolled, firefighters having withdrawn from the 9th floor, fire on the 10th floor and rising externally up the face of the building. The fire in the flat on the 11th floor was particularly ferocious, and there appears to have been an abnormally high fire load in this area. At this point, it seems that the fire also spread downwards externally, setting light to maisonettes on the 5th and 7th floors. Yes?
Yes.
It appears that the external fire spread to the floors below was caused by burning products from the fire above, which fell and entered the maisonettes via open windows on what was a very hot day. These products could have come from anything that had burnt within the maisonettes on the 9th and 10th floors. And then over the page to page 25. From the early findings, the method of external fire spread is not seen as particularly unusual. The issues about melting plastic windows initially reported in the media do not seem to have been a factor, as during the review, the window frames were confirmed as aluminium. However, whilst the windows and infill panels does not appear to have been an exceptional cause of the fire spread, this matter will be subject to confirmation by the full investigation. Yes. Now that made clear, didn't it, that there had been external downwards and upwards fire spread?
Yes.
And the first paragraph of Section 3 is in fact entitled Internal and External Fire Spread. Yes?
Yes.
And if you look on that page, at page 25, under Emerging Issues, it says this: although the cause of the fire at Lakanal House has been identified, the fire development and fire spread was unusual. The initial investigations have not as yet been able to identify the mechanisms that caused the fire development and spread. Was it your own view at the time, having read this report, that the fire development and external fire spread was unusual?
Yeah, the fact that it noted that there was downward spread would have definitely have caught my attention.
Right. Now, we know that the BRE investigated the fire at Lakanal for the department, and Dr. Crowder of the BRE has told us that his primary contact in the department was Brian Martin. Would that be right?
Yes, it would. If
we then go to BRE 405878, this is the BRE's Fires of Special Interest Report, or FOSI, I think it was acronymed to, at Lakanal. And you can see that on page 1 there, the date of this document is the 17th of December 2010, prepared for the Metropolitan Police. And if you go to page 2 of this document, you'll see who prepared it, David Crowder, and approved by Dr. Corinne Williams.
Yes.
Now, if you go, please, in this report to page 195, this is the report into Lakanal. So, and you can see that the date of this document.
Yes.
So this was submitted to the department at around about the same time as the Ken Knightless report.
Right.
Yes. Were you aware of this report from the BRE at the time?
I don't recall this one.
You don't recall it. Do you remember discussing the BRE investigation or its results with Brian Martin?
Brian would have kept me appraised. So if I hadn't read it, and I can't recall, then Brian would have kept me broadly attuned to what was going on, because it was of importance to understand what actually happened here and how it happened. So, yes.
Yes. Let's look at the next page, please. Page 196. And if we look at the first paragraph on that page, 5 lines down, it says, on odd floors. Do you see? Towards the right-hand side.
Yes.
On odd floors, the external wall to each bay consists of a full-height painted aluminium window frame assembly with layered polymeric panels forming the lower halves of these sets, figure A1 and figure A5.
Yes.
On even floors of blockwork, a half wall with door and window set leaves room for a narrow balcony on each side of the building, figure A6, providing additional means of escape to the main stairwell. This is described in more detail later. Balconies have steel guardrails and polymeric panels fitted to them, figure A7. Now, within this short space of time, it looks like the Investigation of Real Fire's project team had actually identified polymeric products within and on the external walls of Lakanal House. Yes? Yes. Now, Dr. Crowder of the BRE has confirmed in his evidence that he gave to the inquiry, day 230, page 7, at lines 2 to 10 for our purposes, that the significance of this finding is that that meant that the team knew that combustible products had been used in the external wall refurbishment. And they knew that at this early stage.
Okay.
That's what he told us. Now, just bearing that in mind, I just want to show you one or two other parts of the report. Page 202. If you look at the third paragraph down, it says, falling burning debris from flats 79 and 65, most probably from both the window facade assemblies and the contents of flat 79, ignited materials in flats 37 and 53, located on the 5th and 7th floors, respectively. It has not been possible to determine which source of falling debris was responsible for each flat that was ignited. Footage from Channel 4 confirmed reports that these two flats happened to have windows open. These windows appeared to be open in such a way that would enable them to collect falling debris into the flat. Flat 37 appeared to become involved shortly before, approximately 2 minutes, flat 53. And then if we go to page 203, halfway down the page, first heading in bold, potential implications for building regulations. The following issues are of note with respect to building regulations and approved document B. And then he goes on to say in the third paragraph from the bottom, external fire spread. You see that?
Yes.
And he says, yes. So external fire spread, yes. Fire initially spread up externally from flat of origin. Fire spread down due to burning material falling. Wind may also have been significant in blowing the fire through the corridor. So both upward and downward external fire spread were observed at Lakanal, as we've seen.
Yes.
And the significance of that is identified by Dr. Crowder in this report, yes?
Yes.
But there's no further commentary provided here about the possible reasons for the observed external fire in either direction, up or down, is there?
Would appear not, no.
No. Now, we know that Brian Martin told the BRE at the end of July 2009, 28th of July, 2 days before the Ken Knight report, that for the purposes of the fire investigation contract with the department, the BRE need not revisit the fire at Lakanal. And having raised the matter with his colleagues in the FRD, the BRE could now, as he put it, step away from the investigation. Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
Did Mr. Martin discuss that with you?
I believe he did.
Why?
And
Well, sorry, continue. You're about to say something.
yeah, something of this importance would have been discussed with me, Bob Ledsome, head of division, and we probably would have discussed it with Sir Ken Knight as well.
And what was the reason for asking the BRE to step away from the investigation?
I believe at this point there was two aspects. There was London Fire and Rescue Service were wanting, in fact I believe they have a duty to undertake their own investigation, and I believe, forgive me from recollection, the Met Police were also investigating this fire, and so the discussion probably would have covered that, notwithstanding we would like to learn from this fire, but when the relevant fire and rescue authority that has a locus to actually investigate, especially where unfortunately there were deaths, and the Met Police were undertaking their work too, it was agreed that perhaps we should step away and wait for their work to be shared where they could with us to glean learnings from that.
Now, let's move on in the year. CLG 1004193. Mr. Chairman, I'm just looking at the clock, actually, and just thinking whether it's wise to go into this document before the break.
Would you rather stop there?
It's sensible. We're making reasonable progress. I think we can afford to take the break. I should just say we're not going to get to the next witness this afternoon, so
I did wonder about
I'll
that.
take the opportunity during the break to warn him, and he can be released before the tube strike problems become worse.
Yes, and we better apologise for having kept him here all day.
I will certainly do that.
Yeah. Right, well, we'll take our break now,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bird. We'll come back at 3:30 to resume, and Again, please don't discuss your evidence
Okay,
then.
sir.
Thank you. Would you ask Mr. Burd to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Burd?
Yes, sir.
Ready to carry on?
Yes.
Okay, Mr.
Yes.
Burd, yes. Now, I want to show you CLG 1004193, please. This is the email we were going to look at. It's an email from Ken Knight to Sandy Bishop, copied to you and Brian Martin. If you you need to go to the bottom of the chain for it, please. And it's dated the 15th of December 2009, restricted, Lakanal House, and he sets out the fact that he'd attended a meeting with the Metropolitan Police, and in the second paragraph he says, the MPS outlined there the results, I'm sorry, I've misread that because of the typo. He says that the MPS outlined their results of a recent Building Research Establishment report, copy attached, which indicates that fire testing on the panels beneath the windows of the Lakanal House flats were demonstrated to propagate flame and fail the required level of surface spread of flame to meet the building regulations requirements. The panels were installed in Lakanal House as part of the 2007 refurbishment programme. The earlier assumptions arising from the BRE tests are that the panels enhanced the vertical spread of flame from the flat of origin and may have contributed to the downward fire spread due to falling burning fragments of the panels. Now, if we scroll up, please, we can see your response. We go, yeah, that's it. If you go to the page 2 in the middle there, same day, you respond and you say, I suggest we need to be very careful here. Clearly, we need to understand what actually happened and discussions with building control, the specifier, the installers and others, but we don't want to set any hairs running. What did you mean by that?
Quite simply, we needed to understand what actually happened in terms of the fire and how the refurbishment was designed in terms of what date of the regulations it was due to meet and similar. So I think it was just saying we need to do it properly, but we just need to have the full gamut of the evidence.
Why would acting on the BRE's findings set hairs running?
Because, again, if we don't have the full understanding and appreciation of all aspects of the fire and needing to be quite clear in terms of the builder, the designer, what they were designing to, it was just, just to gather all the information first.
But you weren't going to be gathering all the information first because you'd put a stop to the BRE's investigations earlier in the year.
I hadn't put a stop to the BRE.
Well, the BRE had been told to step away from the investigation, and as you told us, the reason for that was that the LFB and the Met were doing their own investigations.
Yeah, that was my understanding as why BRE was stood down by the department.
Yeah,
but
that's right. So the question then is, well, you weren't going to be gathering any further information because the department had told the BRE to step away.
But from recollection, and because of the need to learn and understand a situation, I believe that such information was due to be ultimately shared with the department as well. So again, when you don't have BRE, in this case, there and then, providing such information, if we were receiving it via Met Police when allowed or the Fire and Rescue Service, all I was setting out there is that we clearly need to make sure that we have all of the pertinent information.
Did you consider that the conclusions that the panels were involved in the fire spread, the vertical fire spread, were wrong?
No.
Given that the department hadn't sought further assistance from the BRE on this, on what basis did you think you were in a position to reach any view at all?
As I say, that's why I don't want to start any hairs running. I wanted to know all of the information.
But you weren't going round in circles slightly, but you weren't going to get any information, is this right, until the Met had concluded their investigations, as had the LFB?
I don't know.
So what were you waiting for? When would you understand what actually happened, using your words?
When we understood what the work was undertaken, by whom, what iteration of the building regulations, and in this case approved document B, was applicable, just to understand the full gamut of the situation.
Right. Now you say discussions with building control, the specifier, the installer and others should assist. Was it the department who was going to be having those discussions?
Not directly, no.
Indirectly?
No.
Well, how?
Again, as part of this was now a formal investigation, I was under the impression that these people involved with this work would have entered into discussions with these professions and those involved with the building work.
So I'm not sure I'm following you. Looking at your first, and I don't want to lengthen this unduly, but looking at your first main sentence here, after we need to be very careful, you say we need to understand what actually happened, and discussions with building control, the specifier, the installer and others should assist. Who would be involved in those discussions? Who did you contemplate?
Typically, those involved in the formal investigation would be having discussions.
Right, so that's the police.
Yes.
How would the police discussions, as it were, with building control, for example, help you?
Because again, it would be about understanding the situation, what role they held in the building work, if any, and it's trying to get the full raft of information pertinent to this important and tragic fire.
But you would not actually ever get to see what those discussions contained, would you? Because they'd be subject to police procedures.
Potentially initially, but they might be released thereafter.
I see. Now, if we get up to Brian Martin's reply at 10:51, we scroll up to page 1. He says, same day, and it's to you, honestly, I leave you alone for 5 minutes. And then he says, I'm not convinced about this. The pictures of the elevation of Lakanal House don't suggest to me that the spandrels were particularly significant. It's nothing like Irvine.
Okay.
Now, when you received that email, did you unquestioningly accept his suggestion that the cladding, or the external panels rather, at Lakanal were, quotes, nothing like Irvine?
I don't know what I thought. For me, I would consider all the relevant evidence when we had it.
Right.
This is Brian's opinion.
Do you know what it was based on?
No.
You say at the top of the thread, if we just go up to that, in response to him, literally a minute later, nor is Peter wise, which is why we just go for a general fire safety message not focused on elevations. I promise that I do listen to you. But why did you consider that a general fire safety message was sufficient?
For recollection, it would have been in relation to a general fire safety message in the first instance, and then when we had the detailed understandings, we could see if there were any potential implications for the approved document. I believe that's what I'm referring to.
Right. Now I want to turn to the coroner's recommendations and the department's response. You deal with this to some extent in your statement at paragraph 34, page 17. But perhaps we ought to look at that because you set it all out there. That's your statement, CLG 3019461, page 17, paragraph 34. And you can see the recommendations that you set out. The first is, provides clear guidance in relation to regulation B4 of the building regulations with particular regard to the spread of fire over the external envelope of the building and the circumstances in which attention should be paid to whether the proposed work might reduce existing fire protection. Recommendation 1 is expressed in words and adopts a format which are intelligible to the wide range of people and bodies engaged in construction, maintenance and refurbishment of buildings, and not just to professionals who may already have a depth of knowledge of building regulations and building control matters. That's recommendation 2. And then finally, provides guidance which is of assistance to those involved in maintenance or refurbishment of older housing stock, and not only those engaged in design and construction of new buildings. That's recommendation 3. Now, I put that to you really for your own, just to remind you of what you said about those. Now, we then look at CLG 50461. And what I'm now showing you is the submission drafted by Brian Martin on the 11th of April 2013 to Don Foster. Now, Don Foster was the minister with the responsibility for the building regulations at the time, wasn't he?
That's correct.
Yes, and the heading is Lakanal House Inquest Rule 43 recommendations regarding building regulations. Just looking at it on the page, do you recall whether you had any input into this draft?
If I didn't input directly to the draft, I would have had discussions with Brian about the development of the draft going forward.
Did Brian Martin ask you to approve this document?
No, I don't believe he did.
Did you nonetheless approve it and see it before it went?
I can't recall. Could I maybe see the end of the document?
Yes, of course. Can you scroll down to page 4, please? That's the end of the document.
Oh, I do apologise. Then it suggests that there was a list. If we go back up.
Page 3.
There we go.
CC. You're CC'd on it.
I
As Louise
yeah.
Upton and Peter Holland.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. So I would have been copied in on it.
Yeah, well, indeed. But did you approve it before it went out?
I don't recall approving it. I might have discussed it with Brian and Bob Ledsome as well, actually.
Right. Now let's go to page 4, please. Sorry, page 1, please, paragraph 4. And you can see the recommendations made to Don Foster by Brian Martin. Mm-hmm. And he says that you agree to respond to the coroner's recommendations at Annex A, page 3, regarding building regulations as follows. A, acknowledge that the guidance in approved document B, fire safety, can be difficult for inexperienced people to apply. B, commission a review of guidance given to members of competent person schemes to ensure that there is proper understanding of the scope of the schemes and where fire protection requirements affect window installations. C, set out the government's intentions to issue a revised approved document B in 2016 to 17 following a full review of the fire safety aspects of building regulations. This would use the department's new style guide for easy to read approved documents and take account of current research, which is due to deliver in 2014. Now, if you go to the next page, please, paragraph 11, under considerations, you'll see there at the bottom of the screen, he says this. However, a rewrite of approved document B would be a significant project, and we would therefore recommend that this be done as part of a fuller review. The department has not made any statements about when the next review would be carried out, but with Minister's agreement, we have commissioned research intended to feed into a future edition. This work is due to be completed in 2014, and we would expect that a revised approved document could be published during 2016 to 17. Now, focusing on those timescales there, which to some extent are reflected in the recommendation given to the minister.
Yes.
Did that reflect your understanding of the timescales which would be involved in meeting this recommendation?
Yes.
It did. If we then turn to the response that the department sent to the coroner, we find that at CLG 402788, please. This is dated the 20th of May, or stamped 20th of May 2013, and it's sent to the coroner by Eric Pickles, MP, who was then the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government. Now, I have a few questions in relation to the recommendations here I want to ask you about. You say in relation to recommendation 1 that given that the coroner had been considering the 2000 edition of ADB, the view was taken that her particular recommendation, that clear guidance be provided in relation to B4, had already been addressed as part of the full technical review culminating in 2006. That's what you say in your statement?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, that's the review, is it, that we looked at before, which resulted in the 2006 edition of ADB?
Sorry, could you ask that again? Sorry,
Well, let me rather than try to paraphrase, let me take you back to your statement.
Yes.
Can we go to your statement at page 18, please, and look at paragraph 45? This is in relation to recommendation 1. It's a very long paragraph, and that's why you will understand why I was trying to summarise it.
Sorry.
you refer there to the review that took place between 2004
Yep.
and 2006. Is that the review and the consultation which resulted in the 2006 edition of ADB, which we have been discussing earlier?
Yes.
Yes. Now, do you accept that that edition did not address all the circumstances in which attention should be paid to whether the proposed work might reduce existing fire protection, as you put it?
Sorry, were you reading that then, sir? That last point you just said? Or was-
Yes.
Sorry, as I said, the full technical review there. Could you ask the question again of me? Sorry, sir.
Well, I showed you the recommendation.
Yeah.
I was reading from the recommendation. We can go back to that if you like.
Sorry, I'm struggling a bit.
All right. Well, let me see if I can do better than that. Can we go back to paragraph 34 on page 17, the page before? 43. Sorry, and you can see recommendation. You can see the recommendations there,
Yes,
and
sir.
particularly recommendation 1.
Yeah.
Circumstances in which attention should be paid to whether the proposed work might reduce existing fire protection. Yes. That was the recommendation.
Yes.
Do you accept that the work done in the 2006 edition didn't address in any way, quotes, the circumstances in which attention should be paid to whether the proposed work might reduce existing fire protection?
So, from recollection, this is relating to the situation whereby you have an existing building and then you undertake additional works to it. So in this case, the addition of new windows, new infill panels and similar. So by virtue of what was happening was tantamount to building work, then if that work had been undertaken now, then the 2006 edition would be just as applicable to building work on an existing building as it would be to a brand new building.
Yes. And in light of the discussions we've had, to gather your evidence over the last couple of days or so, do you still maintain that the amendments made to 12.5 to 12.9, particularly 12.5, 6 and 7, in the 2006 edition of Approved Document B, were sufficient to address the coroner's recommendation here that clear guidance should be given about the circumstances in which attention should be paid to whether the proposed work, refurbishment work, might reduce existing fire protection?
Yes, I do, because I believe from recollection that the building work that took place on Lakanal House was to the 2002 approved document. So I suggest with the reordering, reappropriation of the text and similar, controlling more thermal insulation, etc., would meet the need, because if this was built and the work undertaken to the 2002 approved document, then it was only thermal insulation in ventilated cavities. So I suggest that this move in 2007 would have placed more demands on the building work taking place. So yes.
Right. So your view, is it that 12.6 and 12.9 were sufficient to address that recommendation and didn't need to be revisited in the light of Lakanal?
It was my opinion, from recollection, looking at this, that was the case. But again, as further learnings came out, given the Secretary of State made a commitment to the next full review of Approved Document B, then anything further could be revisited as part of that process.
Right. Was there anything in what you had discovered about Lakanal and had read in the BRE's report to lead you to think that 12.5 to 12.9 of Approved Document B in its 2006 form needed revisiting?
Not that I can recall.
Was that true right up until the time you left the department in December 2013?
Yes, I believe it was.
And up until that time, is it the case that you heard not a single word of dispute or disagreement or confusion about the meaning of the word filler and its intended effect in 12.7?
Not that I can recall.
Nor any hint, any flicker or flutter of confusion between class 0 as a concept and limited combustibility as a concept? Nothing?
I can't say nothing, but I can't recall.
Any confusion at all about equivalencies between class 0 and class B? Not a hint? Not a flicker?
Not that I can recall, but I would say this, wouldn't I? By this time I was pretty much full-time on the energy efficiency parts of the building regulations. So those sorts of comments from industry expressing thoughts, observations about the extant Part B would have gone typically to Brian.
If we turn back to page 18 of your statement, you say at paragraph 45 there, in the long paragraph, about 2/3 of the way down, my recollection, you see?
Yes.
My recollection is that the division also felt that the coroner's recommendation had also been addressed by the section being reordered to provide clearer guidance. In the 2000 edition, incorporating 2002 amendments, the guidance on Regulation B4 covered external surfaces first, then offered guidance in relation to external wall construction, which was found to be confusing. The 2006 edition instead started with external wall construction and the indication that the external envelope of a building should not provide a medium for fire spread if it is likely to be a risk to health or safety. The 2006 edition, and it goes on, who in the division felt what you've expressed there, or agreed with that?
Again, as I point out, this is from recollection, and forgive me, this was my witness statement, some 3.5 years old now. I had been provided very kindly by the department, who had managed to rebuild some of my email account, given that I'd left the department in 2013. And so it was recollection that we would have discussed this, Brian, Bob, in terms of that what we were looking at was an installation following the guidance in the earlier iteration of the ADB. And so it was felt that things should have improved, provisions should have increased. However, there was, with the other recommendations as well, there was still the commitment thereafter by Secretary of State that we would, well, I wouldn't be there by then, but the department would start in effect in 2013, 2014, or thereabouts, on a full review.
Can you go forward in this statement, please, to page 21 and look at paragraph 54? You say there, in the fourth line, the decision not to produce further guidance at this time, which would have required a further review of ADB, was supported by a suggestion in the covering submission from Louise Upton to the Secretary of State, dated 13th of May 2013, that a review might also have a disruptive effect on the construction industry, which was an area of the UK economy that the government was particularly trying to reduce the burden of regulation on and stimulate economically.
Yes.
Did you, and indeed do you still, consider that those considerations were appropriate factors to weigh in the balance when considering recommendations made for the preservation of life?
I believe they did form part of the submission and therefore were relevant, but answering directly the coroner's recommendations, the commitment was still made as to what steps would be taken for in this case, and it covered more than just approved document B, the next steps for a full review, which would have also included by then the publication of a number of pieces of research that could have fed into that full review.
Let's go to CLG 402788 again and go to page 2, which is the letter from Mr. Pickles, as he then was,
Yes.
to the coroner, page 2, final paragraph, where he says, and this is in relation to recommendation 2, we've commissioned research which will feed into a future review of this part of the building regulations. We expect this work to form the basis of a formal review leading to the publication of a new edition of the approved document in 2016/17.
Yes.
Do you agree that as a substantive exercise, so far as you were concerned, up until the time you left, that was never carried out?
That was never carried out.
No. Did the department, to your knowledge, during the period May to December 2013, when you left, have a plan to get to that position?
This date would have been worked out on the basis of likely resource within the division. The delivery of a suite of research in 2014, and therefore, as long as you could start sufficiently early, potentially 2014, maybe late around the end of 2014, then you could potentially deliver an approved document in that time frame.
I just want to ask you one or two questions finally, or penultimately, about deregulation and the red tape challenge. You cover this at your statement at paragraph 28 on page 11. Can we please go back to that? You identify the future of building control document in the first part of that paragraph.
Yeah.
And then at the foot of that page, you say, as a result of the global financial crisis that began in 2008, the coalition government introduced a raft of policies aimed at stimulating the UK economy. These manifested as an intention to cut through red tape by introducing a one-in, one-out rule introduced on 1st of January 2011. This rule became one-in, two-out on 1st of January 2013, whereby no new regulation was permitted to be introduced without other regulations being cut by a greater degree. The drive to cut red tape generally, allied with a commitment to reduce the burden of regulation on house builders in the 2010 spending review, formed the basis of the coalition government's deregulatory agenda. And although the Building Regulations Division still undertook some revisions of the approved documents, particularly those concerned with energy efficiency, which occupied most of my time, its activity was mostly focused on supporting this wider deregulatory agenda. My recollection is that the building regulations were not exempt from what has been referred to as the red tape challenge. And then you go, so that's your evidence there. If we then look at page 59 of your statement, paragraph 189, you say this: on 30th of September 2010, I attended the third 2010 meeting of BRAC. The fourth agenda item was a presentation on the government's new one-in, one-out policy. In line with the stated policy, the presentation to BRAC committee was that regulation must be a last resort and the cost-benefit analysis must stack up. Did you at any time yourself consider how these policy constraints might affect how you were able to carry out your role?
Yes.
How?
With this approach, we were finding that as officials, and what I believe I've mentioned it somewhere else within my witness statement here, we also were seeing quite a significant reduction in headcount. And so from my perspective, I think, including plus myself, I had 5 technical members of staff by the time I left in 2013. And so what we found ourselves was spending an inordinate amount of time looking at how we could deregulate, undertake other activities supporting deregulation, which meant we couldn't necessarily, with the resources we had, focus in the job at hand.
Did you consider that it had any effect on the review of approved document B?
By virtue of the commitment in the periodic review consultation, where there was a suggestion that the review, I believe, would start in 2013, I believe it would have chimed. But I need to point out that that was 2 different governments. And so I don't necessarily believe at the time that I was in the department, where we were being limited and hadn't done anything on Part B, but we had just set a timescale for the next full review.
Right. Did anybody consider, and if so, raise this point or question whether the approved documents fell outside the 1 in, 1 out, and later 1 in, 2 out regime, which were directed at the regulation rather than statutory guidance?
There would have been discussions, and it's my recollection that we were caught by 1 in, 1 out, and 1 in, 2 out. So going forward, it was my understanding that that was a relevant consideration.
Did anybody put up a fight and say, well, the regulations is one thing, but all this is guidance about how you might be able to comply? It doesn't fall within the scope of the agenda.
If that discussion did take place, it would have happened far, far higher than I assumed.
Right. I take it that you never raised this point with anybody.
I might have had discussions with Bob,
Right.
but that would have been it.
You refer in paragraph 202 of your statement at page 62, if we can look at it, please, to a letter. And you say this, on the 15th of June 2011, the department sent a letter from Minister Bob Neal to Oliver Letwin regarding the red tape challenge and the appropriateness of the inclusion of fire safety regulations in it. Now, the letter itself is at CLG 3019153. Let's look at that. It's dated the 15th of June, as you can see, 2011. It's sent to Oliver Letwin, who was the Minister for Government Policy at the Cabinet Office. The title is Red Tape Challenge Fire Safety. You see that?
Yes.
And Bob Neal, I think, he was the Fire Safety Minister, I think.
That's correct, sir.
Yes. If you look down at the first two paragraphs, the basis of his point is that he was complaining essentially that fire safety was red tape and was objecting to its removal, reduction, or revocation.
Yes.
That's the point being made in this.
Yes.
And if you go to page 2 of the letter, it refers to the Lakanal House fire. Yes.
Yes.
And it says in the third paragraph down, the timing is also particularly sensitive as we approach the anniversary of the tragic fire at Lakanal House in Camberwell, in which 6 people lost their lives. Key to the ongoing investigation will be the application of the fire safety order, and any suggestion that it may be removed is likely to be emotive. Given that this is a sensitive issue in London, one could easily see how such a red tape review would lead to negative coverage in papers like the Evening Standard. I've shown you a bit of this. Did you have any input into this letter?
I don't believe so, no.
Did you see it at the time?
I would have done.
Did you agree with the concerns expressed by Mr. Neal in it?
Yes.
You did. Now, you also say in your statement, if we could just go to that, page 14, paragraph 34, please, that from around the end of the period of the last Labour government, pressure started to be placed on the department and across Whitehall, and there was a drive to seek to reduce resources, including the headcount and research budget included in the Building Regulations Division. And you set out with the implications for the government, for your department. Did you consider at the time how that affected how the department was able to operate?
Yes.
How? How was it able to operate in light of this?
Well, how it was able, again, with the declining resource, both in terms of research monies and declining resource in terms of headcount, coupled with the undertaking of and being cognizant of the various deregulatory measures, we were left less and less time to focus in on as our roles as typically desk officers for the different parts of the building regulations. And therefore, from my perspective, when I was down to staff numbers that low, typically in the past where we'd had desk officers that might just be overseeing one part of the building regulations, I might ultimately have to draw them off to go and undertake reviews of other parts that didn't necessarily always sit with them. So it was a very, very difficult time. And what I haven't touched upon here as well, albeit technical policy staff were thankfully protected at this stage, in effect, we had all gone through applying for our own jobs, I believe in 2010 as well. So the headcount had gone down by 40% in the department in the time that I was there, which was a sizable period of time. So it was getting increasingly hard to undertake the job at hand. I felt that we did the best job we can do with the resources we had, but I'd had quite enough of it.
I've got one more question, and it is a technical question about approved document B. Can I take you back to CLG 1607, please, which is the 2006 edition of approved document B? We've looked at this before, I think, a number of times. This time I want to show you page 2, if I can, please. It's CLG 1607. No, it's CLG 1607. Yes. It's slightly different. It's a black and white version. But if we go to page 2, please. And this is the as-published version, the version you sent off in December 2006. You can see a description of the main changes. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And if we go, please, to page 3, you can see it goes straight into the contents. Yes?
Yes.
If you go back to page 2, you can see that it covers B1
Yes.
and B3.
Yes.
Yes? There's no B4 in there, is there?
For recollection, can we go to the back cover, sir? Because it might carry over into the back cover. I can't remember, forgive me. Yeah, main changes are continued on the inside back cover, the text on the right-hand column at the very bottom.
Right. I'm not sure we've got that.
Oh.
Let me see if I can explore that particular interesting avenue over the break I'm now going to ask for. But subject to that, I've come to the end of my prepared questions, Mr. Burd, so I'm going to ask the chairman now to take the usual break. I may revisit that with you at the end of the break, after the break, and there may be other questions that I have for you. But, Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, very well. Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Burd, when counsel gets to the end of his questions, we have to have a short break to enable him to check that he's not left anything out, although you may think that's unlikely. And we also have to allow an opportunity for others who are following the proceedings, but not from this room, to suggest questions that ought to be put to you. So we'll break now for 15 minutes, Mr.
Yes, that'd be fine.
That'd be long enough. We'll come back at 4:25 and see if there are any more questions for you then.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Would you ask Mr. Burd to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Burd, well, we'll see if there are any more questions for you.
Thank you,
yes,
sir.
Mr. Billett.
Yes, Mr. Chair. We're halfway through the question, I think, that I was attempting
Right.
unsuccessfully to ask. Can we please go back to CLG 1607? I was on page 2, and you pointed out that the main changes are continued on the inside back cover. I can now show you the inside back cover. Can we please go to page 169? And here they are at the foot of the page. B4, do you see?
Yes, I do, sir.
And you can see 2 changes identified. Notional boundaries, space separation, yes?
Yes.
And roof coverings.
Yes.
With the new European system of classification for roof coverings.
Yes.
Nothing there about 12.5, 12.6, 12.7 or diagram 40, is there?
No, sir.
No. Why were those changes not highlighted here?
From our perspective, undertaking a full review of the approved document B, it was a huge, sizable task involving, in the end, hundreds of pages of statutory guidance. We typically develop the sort of main changes document as we go, and therefore it was this circumstance that actually, to what you just referred, didn't find its way into that listing.
So was it a function of timing?
Yes.
So too late to explain what filler meant, or at least flag it up as an important change?
I think just with the volume, with a full fundamental review of Part B, and we put sprinklers in for the first time in B3, again, trying to remember them all and then prioritise all of the changes, things would unfortunately fall off the list. And so that's just what's happened here, and what's been caught is what's been caught. But as I say, these were 2 brand new iterations of the approved document B. And yes, while people could dip into these listings, the expectation would be they'd still need to read them.
Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Burd, thank you very much. You've been extremely helpful, and I'm very grateful for your evidence to the inquiry. It remains for me only to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And it's right, I should thank you as well, Mr. Burd, on behalf of all 3 members of the panel. You've given evidence for a long time, but I'd like you to know that we have found it very interesting and very helpful to hear what you have to tell us. So we're very grateful to you for coming along and giving us the benefit of your recollection and knowledge. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you all very much.
And you're now free to go, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, just a minute. Well, that must be the end for today.
It is. And tomorrow morning we have
another
witness from the department.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, we break there for the day and we resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you
Thank you very much.